Part one brought us to the moment when CBD's scientific promise collided with the reality of commercialization. Commercialization did not trigger a graceful march toward higher standards. Instead, it exposed how badly into the 2020s the CBD marketplace was prepared to go. So, part two begins in a domain where most of the industry still relies on bulk processors, which we do today, white label isolate, and opaque extraction chains, where accuracy problems that are documented in the JAMA studies from 2020, and then later in a follow-up study in 2022. 2020, researchers found that online CBD products were routinely mislabeled. Over a quarter of those contained less CBD than advertised, half contained more, and almost 1 in 5 had a detectable amount of that glamorous molecule known as THC. These findings echoed the earlier results that reinforced what investigative reporters both from the Associated Press and the New York Times were already showing that there is a sector that's growing faster than its ability to regulate quality control can keep up with. Despite the years of warnings, by 2025, the structural conditions have not really changed that much. The FDA still lacks any plan for a regulatory pathway. Congress has not legislated anything with clarity. State rules are the patchwork of improvisation still today, which is fine because there are some companies that actually are benefiting from some of those state norms. For example, Sunsoil in Vermont, which I'll talk about more in the second part. Within the persistently unstable ecosystem that is the CBD and the wellness market today, Sunsoil then stands out because a few other companies do too. They're not the only ones. So vertically integrated, whole plant, solvent-free lipid infusion model is not the direction the market has moved, but it is the direction that they have moved, and the market could have moved, but mostly didn't. But Sunsoil's value isn't that they represent a new industry standard. It's the way they present a contrast case. It's the way that they present what could be a kind of organizational control experiment. What does CB production look like when a company, when an organization, when a group treat or as marketing language? When they remove the glitter, when they remove the gold, and when they look at what are you doing? So when a company treats consistency, transparency, and process integrity as an opportunity, it becomes embedded in a broader CBD story. Part two then is not a story about progress. It's a story about contrast. It's about how some organizations can cultivate and foster trust inside a market that maybe still hasn't earned it. But what that tells us about regarding organizational decision making under regulatory ambiguity is that people that follow regulations actually tend to care a lot about quality control. In part two, I want to look at that more closely by considering the pathway that followed from the Farm Bill. Let's get into that. Then came the laboratory revelations, including the pivotal 2020 JAMA study that tested the 84 CBD products sold online. They found that 26% contained less CBD than labeled, 43% contained more than labeled, and nearly 20% contained detectable THC that supposedly violated the federal hemp limits. And this was an extension of the JAMA's 2017 study. The findings aligned with the investigative reporting from outlets like the AP and the New York Times that described batch inconsistencies and variable purity, if you will, and the contamination in the low-cost CBD oils. So between 2019 and 2021, CBD began to enter what felt like a credibility cloud. Large retailers like CVS and Walgreens, which did carry CBD topicals around 2017, 2018, began to retreat by 2024. The agency had no workable regulatory pathway for CBD as a dietary supplement or as a food ingredient. So the consumer interest at the time, it doesn't fade. Consumers are not paying attention to the FDA public hearings. They're paying attention to the wellness marketing. That's what's promoted in their algorithmic feeds, and that's what's bright and colorful with their pastel labels. The consumer interest doesn't fade. The pandemic years from 2020 to early 2022 brought heightened anxiety and sleep disturbances, and the CBD sales surged accordingly. The Brightfield Group reported that the United States CBD market grew to $4.7 billion by the year 2021, and this was driven largely by seeking something that was soothing and was not intoxicating. This demand occurred alongside the increasing consumer skepticism, though, that if CBD was everywhere, why did some products seem to work consistently and other identical dosages behaved differently from brand to brand? So this question really catalyzed the second phase of the industry maturation, which occurred from around 2021 to 2023. This is the market began to stratify. There was now transparency that was expected. There were vertically integrated producers issuing certificates of analysis or COAs that people could read if they scanned the QR code on the label. They also included agricultural reports, terpene profiles, solvent residues, microbials, and heavy metal panels. Lower quality operators relied on the white label isolates and opaque supply chains, often imported or inconsistently processed. You don't see that process, which is concerning for consumers and it's concerning for regulators. And it should be concerning for the owners of those companies, but I'm not sure if it was for everyone. So peer-reviewed research reinforced this market split. A 2022 analysis of the scientific reports found that off-the-shelf CBD products in the United States with no testing oversights were far more likely to contain inaccurate cannabinoid concentrations than those sold in the regulated jurisdictions that they studied. So in the 2021 Journal of Cannabis Research, they similarly noted that labeling accuracy was highly variable outside the vertically integrated operations. So the FDA had no clear path. Congress, though, by 2025, has not legislated a CBD framework, and states are continuing to improvise their patchwork rules, which in a way is what Colorado started doing in 2012 with Amendment 64. Consumers have become experts in their own rights, at least they thought they had. They were now, though, paying attention to the sourcing and transparency if it was included. It's reasonable to ask why. Why not? This is really the hinge of the story. I want to talk about Sunsoil and how they became a credibility outlier in terms of their extraction, their transparency, and their vertical integration. By the time the CBD market reached its fractious maturity with the credibility scandals and the mislabeled tinctures and the regulatory uncertainty of a wellness sector that was drowning in its enthusiasm, a few companies are standing out. They are acting in ways that show regulation can guide a high quality product and it can create accountability and credibility with a new market where people's trust is fragile but possible. A few companies stand out not because they are shouting the loudest, because they are looking like leaders. Sunsoil is one of the striking thing is that Sunsoil's differentiation is not futuristic. It's defiantly old world. Much of the industry sprinted toward the hyper-processed CBD isolates and industrial scale extractions, but Sunsoil leaned into a different approach that looked more like herbal pharmacology than modern cannabinoid chemistry. They used whole plant lipid infusion. This method involves steeping hemp directly into organic MCT oil, a supplement made from a type of fat called a medium chain triglyceride. So its molecules are smaller than those in most of the fats that you eat, which are long chain triglycerides, and this makes them easier to digest. So you can absorb MCT into your bloodstream quickly. This turns it into energy that you can use, supposedly. The absorption factor does play a role. High-speed fuel. This is simple, elegant, and deeply inconvenient for companies that are chasing margin over consistency, though. It requires vertically integrated farming. In other words, predictable harvesting chemistry, meticulous control of temperature, and meticulous control of filtration. It removes the single largest vector for error in the CBD supply chain as well, the purification bottleneck where contaminants, solvent residues, and potency drift proliferate. In an industry where many brands are essentially indistinguishable by label formulations, from isolate powders that are reconstituted into oils and dropped into nearly identical tincture bottles, the process that Sunsoil goes through becomes an ethical counterpoint. By the way, I'm not paid to promote them at all. This is a fascinating case study. I'm not paid to promote any of the companies I talk about, but it's harder, slower, and more transparent. It produces a full spectrum extract, though, where terpenes are intact. The extraction is only half the story. Sunsoil doesn't just test its product, it publishes every lab result that they receive. So cannabinoid profiles, terpene analyses, microbial screenings, and heavy metal tests, all of that is accessible. They behave like a regulated pharmaceutical manufacturer in the state of Vermont. Going back to Vermont, right? Just like Ben and Jerry's. They remain functionally and lightly monitored, though, agricultural commodity. That transparency isn't performative, it's strategic sense giving. It's saying, look, we see the long game here. We see that eventually consumers are going to look for something that is the most reliable once they find out what these other products are doing. And those relying on CBD for anxiety, sleep, and inflammatory discomfort or neurological conditions, someone upstream is taking responsibility for what they ingest. In other words, Sunsoil is doing that. A few other companies are doing that. This is precisely what organizational researchers mean by good strategy, though. CBD is a product whose efficacy cannot be easily verified by the consumers. Consumer reports is not a scientific marker. There's no immediate signal like THC that can show its indicator of potency. Companies need to construct that vertical integration and the traceable sourcing that are transparent in lab results and manufacturing methods that minimize risk by design. And Sunsoil does all of these because most CBD companies outsource the extraction, bottling, or both. Sunsoil, from its Vermont soil chemistry to its tincture fill lines, collapses the spaces where errors occur, and it also collapses the distance between the grower and the consumer. The lack of the FDA monograph of standardized potency testing, businesses have two options. They can behind relief, best ever, or they can showcase their efforts. I think the action is more powerful than marketing. Picked up on that. Transparency is a proactive approach, and being explicit. Perspicuity includes posting COAs, clearing the explanation of extraction procedures, exposing the beginnings of the farm, of where it was in the farm, sharing batch level test findings, and making internal quality indicators available to consumers all relate to this proactive approach. In organizational communication, this is referred to as sense giving, assisting the stakeholders, assisting the consumers in interpreting the information in an unclear situation by the intentional narrative clarity. I talked about this way back. That's what sense giving is. Sunsoil had an active approach to transparency that included third-party lab testing, providing the comprehensive cannabis profiles. They are providing consumers with epistemic scaffolding that the FDA has not yet. Consistency is really the foundation of any therapeutic trust. CBD is a credence good, which means that its effects cannot be accurately judged by consumers without long-term usage or scientific research. Credence products establish a unique trust economy in which consumers rely on the repeated and consistent experiences to make quality decisions. In a sector where potency drift is prevalent, consistency takes on its own therapeutic promise. Sunsoil, in this case, that farm to bottle concept lowers the unpredictability at every stage, from single source farming through the whole plant infusion with controlled temperature extraction, which reduces the requirement for post hoc mixing, and reducing the number of handoffs from farmers, processors, and bottlers. They lessen that noise that seems to really create a lot of tension in the CBD product category. They operate also like a high reliability organization. By an extension, they are able to catch early that don't spiral into something bigger. Their behavior is a signal of trust. Consumers recognize quality by the consistency of the signals that they are sending, including the labels. Companies choose this harder path. CBD manufacturers could have followed the industrial process of bulk isolates and dissolving those and bottling them and then just selling them. That's more efficient and it's more lucrative in the short term. It also enables the creation of limitless number of brands overnight. But this practice also creates a confidence issue that only becomes evident later, since it results in uneven low quality items. Sunsoil takes the approach of something that is more difficult but more enduring. Through minimal processing, without the solvents, have a direct path from the earth to the droplet. This is a slow process that is pricey. It is trust building. It is creating something that endures. In deregulated marketplaces, integrity becomes a competitive differentiator. It's a resource that when people are too excited about the marketing buzz, a little bit too above the idea that scientific rigor is really the best system that we have, we can create misguided interpretations of claims. And consumers, consciously or unconsciously, interpret things like accuracy and being unwilling to that can provide a competitive edge as consumers choose firms that follow the regulated norms that are backed by science and that are in support of their own safety. Okay, so in a therapeutic gray zone like CBD, trust needs to work harder. Customers are evaluating stigma versus science, anecdotal rhetoric versus transparency, psychoactive disposition of cannabis in the social minds of people with therapeutic hemp. FDA silence against brand promises is the next thing we want to look at. Stability, consistency, and a method in a market that is overly hyped, right? It's promising a lot and delivering very little, which happens more often than it needs to. Stop falling for the overhyped promises In effect, though, they establish a micro-institution of trustworthiness inside a macro-environment of uncertainty. In the deregulated therapeutic marketplaces, trusted companies oddly do follow regulations. They construct guardrails as well. They become stakeholders in the creation of those regulations later on. Sunsoil's perspective on integrity is an advantage. Sunsoil reveals, and cannabis companies in general can reveal, that integrity is not the absence of wrongdoing, but it's the active presence of disciplined decisions that consider each high quality extraction, though. You have slow and low tech and high quality. This is your vertically integrated operations. Consistent chemistry between batches and consumer education options that refuse to depend on marketing words. These are short term, but they generate trust in the long term. Trust is the foundation that therapeutic ecology must be built on and cannot counterfeit. In a world of grifting and marketing nonsense and pseudoscientific fog, this approach could state that trust is not something that you profess, it's not something that you state. It's based on your verified actions. What are you doing? That's all for today's episode. This is Dr. William Hoffman on Decisions at the Fulcrum. Thank you for listening. I will talk to you next time. See you along the way.